Hello, and welcome to the first webisode of what I like to call Ask a Historian. So the topic for today, hypothetically, consider that you're in your home or apartment and strange stories start to come in over the news. People are acting erratically, riots and disturbances in various cities and so forth. Pretty soon your neighbors begin to eat one another. Then the military shows up. They burn things and blow up napalm and generally do nothing other than get themselves eaten. The power goes out. The water turns off. Society collapses. You're in the middle of the zombie apocalypse. What should you do? And more to the point, how should you defend yourself now that no one's going to do it for you? One of the things that you shouldn't do is get your information from someone whose knowledge of weapons and warfare comes from video games. You should ask a historian. So, I actually am a historian. I have a PhD in ancient history. I've studied military history since the time I was about 9. If you look at the stress wrinkles in my eyes, you can tell that that takes quite a few years to grow those. I'm also more than nerdy enough, and yes, historians mostly are nerds, to have written a book about this topic, Weapons and Warfare in the Zombie Apocalypse. Furthermore, I'm also fanatical enough to actually own many of the implements that I talk about in this book. So, today's particular focus is going to be on swords as weapons. And before I get into anything, a little history is always good. So swords were actually designed in the Bronze Age. These are ancient technology. Sometime in the middle of the Bronze Age, people learned that they could melt bronze, and then you could make a sword blade out of this through casting. Bronze swords were not forged like iron weaponry. They're actually cast in a mold, so they're easy to make. This is a benefit of the technology, that it's not particularly difficult to make a bronze sword. The only drawback to bronze, well, I suppose twofold drawback, is that the materials that you use to make bronze, tin and copper, are relatively rare, especially tin. So if there's disturbance or disruption of trade routes, then that's going to affect your availability of the metal. And two, bronze is not as good a material to make a sword out of as steel or iron is. It doesn't hold a very sharp edge, and it's more prone to breaking. Right? So subsequently, people managed to learn the technologies behind iron and iron working. This involved higher temperatures in forging. It involved learning how to actually work iron ore to drive the impurities out of it, because iron ore is usually not found in any sort of pure state. So ancient people learned a variety of techniques to get out and over the problems of having to deal with the impurities in the metal that they worked. So you have things like the Japanese with mahogany steel and the folding of the metal. You have Europeans for centuries using what we call pattern welding to do basically the same thing, to disperse impurities throughout the sword blade so that there was no serious weak spot that would compromise the structure of the blade. Modern people don't really have to worry about this, because despite the fact that we might not be the artists that ancient smiths were regarding steel, we have high technology. We have the ability to actually melt steel, which most ancient people could not do, and we can therefore drive impurities out of it. We can scientifically control how pristine and uniform the steel is, and construct it for specific tasks. So we have really good technology in this sense. Now, people talking about swords and zombies usually say one of two things, and both of which are inappropriate in different ways. The first is that a sword is a super weapon, and you should always use one. Once you get a sword, you'll be a barbarian warrior par excellence and destroy the zombie hordes with none being able to stand against you. That's not correct. Two, the sword is a terrible weapon. You won't be able to find it. They're too heavy. You wouldn't know how to use it anyway, etc., etc. So, to dispel both of these. As far as not being able to find a sword, this isn't particularly true, because you're going to be able to find something like this. This is a machete. It has a high carbon steel blade. It's fairly decent steel and capable of taking a good edge. This is sort of capable of a thrusting attack, but it's more used in a chopping sort of manner like this. Of course, these are not necessarily weapons. This is meant to be used as an agricultural tool. And so the design of the weapon, the design of the tool is different from this point of view, specifically in that the spine of this blade is very thin. The focus of a machete is on being flexible. The steel is meant to be something that you can sharpen relatively easily so that if you do damage it in daily use, you can fix it. The flexing of the blade allows you to use this to strike against something that's resilient and woody, and it won't damage the sword, or that is the machete. Right? So the fact that you won't be able to find anything at all, these are extremely common, extremely cheap. It's arguably a sword at least, and certainly it's a lot better than having nothing. Are you going to be able to chop through a zombie's skull every time with this in one blow? No. It doesn't have the cutting power of other types of swords or sword-like implements because it doesn't have the weight in the blade. But it is a lot better than nothing. If you want to get into actual swords, you could do a lot worse than something like this. This is a kukri. This one is, again, many of these are made in India. They're not particularly expensive, but it does have decent high carbon steel. This is something that is a short implement, if you can see, but I tend to classify this as a sword for a variety of reasons. One, because the people that originated this weapon, the Gurkha warriors of Nepal, seem to consider it to be a sword, and the weight of the blade actually far forward, as the blade spine is very thick. This has considerable mass behind it, and it's going to chop very effectively, especially if it's used by someone familiar with its use and someone that's going to keep the blade edge well honed. These are multifunctional weapons. It can strike with this butt plate, the pommel here. You can reverse the blade and strike very savage sort of crushing blows with this thick spine, and of course it's excellent for chopping. You can even pierce with this to a certain extent. So these are excellent weapons, relatively common because they're inexpensive. This is something that would be easy to carry. You're going to be able to carry this as a backup, and certainly this is a lot better than something like a pocket knife, a folding pocket knife, which is really meant as a tool more than a weapon. If you want to get further into the realm of the sword, you can get something like this, which is a gladius. This is a reproduction Roman gladius. The Romans used these for centuries and centuries as the main sidearm of their soldiers, the Roman legionaries. A sword like this is handy and relatively lightweight. You're going to be able to carry it, but at the same time, it's more than heavy enough to do some really savage sort of slashing blows, especially on an unarmored human target or a lightly armored human target. Something like this is fully capable of severing limbs, severing the neck, and it has an extremely sharp point, actually, that's well reinforced. If you look at most sword blades, the design of the blade will actually tell you what it was meant to accomplish, and this sword has a very well-pronounced medial ridge that runs the length of the blade to the point. And so what this does is it tends to make the blade very inflexible and rigid, so that when you stab something with it, the force of the blow isn't going to be dispersed by flexion. It's going to be transmitted through the point into the target. So these are particularly effective weapons, both at stabbing and cutting. It's going to last you a long time. This is part of the idea that you won't be able to find one of these, and you won't be able to use it if you did find it. These aren't going to be as common as say, guns or machetes or something like that. But on the upside, they're not going to go anywhere for a long time. This sword is about 12 years old, and I've abused it heavily through its lifetime, and it still is capable of taking a really good edge. This is near to being shaving sharp, actually, and I've damaged it a lot and managed to fix it every time. So a sword's going to last you a long time once you find one. To the notion that you wouldn't be able to use it, that's silly talk, because zombies aren't going to be carrying swords themselves. you're not getting into a fight with a sword-wielding opponent. You don't have to learn how to fence. You're not going to be able to be forced to read body language and respond in the same way as if you were actually dueling a human opponent. Zombies are monotonous. They come at you straight in a line, and all you have to try to do is get through the skull. Right, so later swords would be decent items as well to have. This is a cavalry saber. This is a light cavalry saber like Napoleonic troops would use in France. The type of soldier called a hussar would use this. And it's certainly capable of really devastating blows. This is a very long, heavy weapon. They are not, certainly not dainty items. This sword was designed to be used from horseback, and so it has a very long, curved blade. These would work fine against zombies, although both this implement and some of the later medieval swords that have very long blades, these are meant to be used on horseback, and so they may be less handy at close ranges, depending on the situation you find yourself in, because they were really meant to be used from a horse and swung with the momentum of the horse behind the blade. These are going to be harder to slash very, very quickly with. It's meant to inflict more of a devastating cutting attack from the speed and the height that a horse gives you. Right? But still, you can certainly do a lot worse than something like this. Now, the only swords that I would not recommend are going to be piercing blades, really, that are going to be relatively rare that you find, but in the secondary sort of aftermarket remade swords that different companies produce. Something like this is going to be rarer than, say, the Roman gladius, or certainly the kukri or the machete. Swords like this, like a rapier, like a small sword, this is a small sword, are designed as civilian dueling weapons. They weren't really used to fight against anything with armor. Of course, zombies don't have armor, but their design is a lot more limiting in certain ways than, say, the gladius, which is designed to do a bunch of different things well. The sword, such as this, with this really thick medial ridge to the blade, takes basically no edge. It has no mass to the blade, so you can't really cut with this at all. All you can do is pierce. And against a zombie, while that may be effective, this design is going to limit you to only doing the piercing. While it is lightweight and you can carry it, I would probably choose something else. But pretty much any other sword is going to serve you well. Are they super weapons? No, they're not. Are they something that you would use in any situation? No, they are not. They're not something that you can use all day because you're using muscular force to wield this thing. But it's fair to say that ancient warriors couldn't wield them all day long either. You're not going to be able to chop your way through a vast horde of zombies with a sword, but they are decent implements and definitely something that you should look into acquiring in the apocalypse if zombies should arise and take over the earth. So that's it for this episode. I am going to do more of these, so look for those. Thank you for watching. If you're interested in blog posts about this and other topics, and or links to my books, you can check those out at adamalazder.blogspot.com. Thank you.